I used to believe my name was written in the foundation of that building. My name is Danielle Callahan. I'm 30 now, but I've been part of Callahan and Sons construction since I was old enough to sweep sawdust off the warehouse floor. My father, Mark Callahan, founder, foreman, boss, once told me I had concrete in my veins. Back then, I thought that was a compliment. I clung to those words like they were sacred. Growing up just outside of Boise, Idaho, my world was cement blocks, steel beams, coffee thermoses, and blueprints spread across the kitchen table. Other girls were reading fairy tales about castles and crowns. I was learning how to read load-bearing charts and permit schedules. When I turned 10, Dad let me sit in on his early morning contractor meetings. Not because I asked, but because I showed up, lunch packed, notebook ready. That's how things were in our house. You showed up, you worked. You didn't wait for someone to hand you a future. You built it. By 16, I knew the name of every supplier in the valley and every foreman on site. College wasn't even a question, it was a detour. But I took it anyway. I went to Oregon State, earned my degree in construction engineering management, and came back home the Monday after graduation. I didn't ask for a vacation, didn't look for jobs elsewhere. I just walked into our small brick office and said, "Where do you need me?" Dad smiled, one of those rare small ones he gave when he didn't want to show too much pride. "Start with the backlogs. Bids are late." So I rolled up my sleeves. I stayed late. I kept track of invoices and schedules and licenses. I slept on the old cot in the supply room during winter storms when the roads iced over. When a crew quit mid-project in Nampa, I stepped in to manage the rest of the work myself. When we hit delays during COVID, I pulled 3 all-nighters in a row, rewriting our supplier schedules to avoid penalties. I didn't just learn the ropes. I tied them into knots and held the place together with them. People started calling me Little Mark behind my back. I didn't mind. I took it as a promise. One day, I'd be Big Mark. I'd be the one steering the ship. But there was one name no one ever said around the office. Claire. Claire Callahan, my older sister by 2 years, was the wind Dad could never catch. She left home at 19 to take art classes in LA, then bounced between Brooklyn, New Orleans, and Portland, chasing photography gigs and dreamy artist communes. I don't remember the last time she called on my birthday. She never visited for the holidays. Sometimes Mom would mention her name at dinner, voice quiet, like an apology. Dad never did. Then, last April, she came back. I remember it was a Thursday, gray skies, budget meeting, truck delivery delayed again. I was wiping mud off my boots when Mom called. "Sweetheart," she said, "Claire's home. Come by for dinner tonight?" I paused. My fingers tightened around the phone. "Claire?" "Yes, she flew in yesterday, just for a bit. Your father's making ribs." When I got to the house that evening, Claire was already there, barefoot in the kitchen, wearing a long white cardigan and drinking out of my favorite coffee mug. "Danny," she said, like she hadn't vanished for a decade. "You look so young." I sat back, trying not to let my face show that my stomach was moving. Something spoke. Dinner was quiet. Claire told me about some stories of Alan and Austin, and a dog she fostered and smattered. Dad barely looked at me. After I told her later, her eyes drifted toward me. "You know," she said, "I've been thinking about coming back. Not forever, just to help. I could give the business a little more personality. You know, make it modern." I didn't respond. I stared at my empty plate, pushing a pea with my fork. That night I couldn't sleep. The office walls felt colder. The routine that once grounded me now made my skin itch. Something was changing, and I didn't know yet that it had already changed. Monday came, cold and quiet. I was in early, 6:45 a.m., like always. The coffee machine gurgled as I printed out site schedules for our downtown expansion project. I had just finished my 3rd email when Dad knocked gently on the door to my office. "Danielle," he said, like he was still testing if I'd answered to that name. "Can you come to the side conference room for a minute?" I followed him down the hall. The door was already cracked open. Claire was inside, standing near the whiteboard with a coffee in her hand and a new leather portfolio in the other. She smiled when she saw me, like we were best friends reunited. "Morning," she chirped. Dad didn't sit. He stood beside her and cleared his throat. "I wanted you to hear this from me," he began. "Claire's officially joining the company." I blinked. My grip on the folder I carried tightened. "She'll be our new creative development director, helping us rebrand, website, presentation decks, marketing, everything. It's a new market now, and I think we need a fresh touch." Claire gave a soft laugh. "Just a splash of color to go with all this concrete." I didn't say much, just nodded. "I'll notify IT and have them set up a company email." But inside, something quiet inside me bent. Not once in 8 years had I been announced like that. Not when I digitized our entire operations system. Not when I kept us afloat through the 2020 supply chain mess. Not even when I landed the St. Anthony Highway project after 6 failed bids. The next few weeks blurred into silence and shallow breaths. Claire floated into meetings late, with lipstick that changed color by the day and opinions that always circled back to fonts and hashtags. She posted behind the scenes at the Family Biz on Instagram. My coworkers, especially the younger staff, seemed enchanted. "She's so different," they said. "It's refreshing." Meanwhile, I was still there. Early mornings, late nights, punching numbers and resolving crew disputes, and fixing errors in our outdated safety compliance logs. I had just finished salvaging a $400,000 mistake from a subcontractor Claire forgot to vet when I saw the first design draft of our new logo. Callahan and Co., it read. Not Callahan and Sons. The old hammer symbol was gone, replaced with a sweeping C in blue, paired with the tagline, "Where structure meets story." Structure meets story. I stared at the screen, my jaw tight. I hadn't been asked. I hadn't even been warned. I went home that night and sat on my apartment floor with a beer in my hand and my back against the front door. My inbox had 127 unread messages. I didn't open them. The next morning, Claire presented her first slideshow to a client. The pitch deck was shiny, slides glided in like a startup pitch, complete with inspirational quotes and lifestyle photos of smiling couples in open-concept kitchens. The client clapped. Dad grinned like he was 20 years younger. "This is the direction we've needed." I clenched my hands under the table. No one saw, or maybe they did and looked away. Later that week, I overheard Dad in the hallway with one of our partners. "Claire's been a real breath of fresh air. The two girls together? Best of both worlds. One's creative, the other practical." The other, practical. That night, I didn't cry. I opened my files, every contract I'd ever written, every system I'd designed. I began documenting, quietly. I didn't know what I was building, but something in me had stopped trusting the walls around me. And I was right to, because just 2 days later, I asked Dad about the Southridge bid, a project I had been leading for 18 months. He hesitated. "Claire submitted the final proposal this morning," he said, without looking up. "Used your outline as a base." "She what?" "It was more of a team effort." I laughed, bitter and hollow. "She hasn't touched a cost projection in her life." "Danielle," he said, tone hardening, "don't make this a problem. This is business." No. This wasn't business. This was betrayal wearing a name badge. Still, I stayed quiet. I kept working, but now, every time Claire smiled in a meeting, I started to see the cracks. I started counting how many decisions happened behind closed doors, and eventually, I stopped asking for answers. I started looking for them myself. I still don't know what made me stay late that Friday. Maybe it was a habit. Maybe something deeper. The sun had dipped behind the skyline, and the office was dark except for the blue glow of my monitor. I was scanning through archived project files, just cleaning up, I told myself. But I was lying. I was looking for something. I didn't know what. Then I saw it. A file I hadn't noticed before, buried in a misnamed folder labeled Q1 2024 Bids Drafts. It wasn't a draft. It was a full legal document, titled Shareholder Transfer Agreement, Callahan and Co. My breath caught. I clicked it open. Dated 2 months ago. It detailed the transfer of 68% ownership of Callahan & Co. from my father, Michael Callahan, to Claire Callahan, my sister, the woman who hadn't been in the country for a year, the woman who hadn't spent 1 minute on a job site in the rain or heat, the woman who just redesigned our logo like she was choosing a wedding invitation. There was no mention of me. Not in the preamble, not in the footnotes, not even in the CC section of the notary acknowledgement. It wasn't a proposal. It was notarized, signed, sealed, done. I stood up so quickly that my chair nearly tipped. I don't remember walking to the file room, but I found myself there, heart pounding, palms cold, the document printed and trembling in my hands. The basement smelled like dust and glue. Everything in that room, old blueprints, ledgers, photos of our first projects, was soaked in my memories. And now, it all felt like someone else's story. I heard footsteps behind me. It was Elaine, Dad's assistant. She looked at the folder in my hand and didn't say a word. You? I said softly. She hesitated, then nodded. He told me it would be temporary, she whispered. Said he'd explain it to you later, that you'd understand. Understand? That night, I didn't go home. I drove for hours. Through downtown, past the industrial parks, the old steel yards we helped rebuild. I pulled over in front of our very first project, Harbor Ridge, still standing proud, still solid. Just like I had been, for years, and now I was invisible. At 2 a.m., I sent a message to my father. We need to talk. Not at the house, not at the office. Tomorrow, 6 p.m., Blue Fern Cafe. Come alone. He replied with just 2 words. I'll be there. The next evening, I sat at a small table by the window, hands folded, laptop open. He came in wearing the same coat he'd had for 10 years, the one Mom once patched at the elbow. He looked older than I remembered, but that night, I didn't see my dad. I saw the man who had erased me. I turned the screen toward him. On one side, my original Everridge proposal. On the other hand, Claire's presentation, the one she'd delivered last week. Identical, down to the formatting. Who gave her permission to copy my work? I asked. He said nothing. You can call it teamwork, strategy, branding, but I know what this is. Theft. He sighed. Claire has strengths you don't. I leaned in. And I have 10 years you can't fake. You think I won't take this to the partners? To the press? His eyes hardened. What do you want, Danielle? I want my name back, I said. And if you want me to stay quiet, you'll remove hers from my project. I want it in writing. You have 2 days. He looked stunned, but I wasn't bluffing. I slid a flash drive across the table. Everything's here, emails, drafts, timestamps. Choose wisely. I left him sitting there, staring at the screen. 2 days later, Elaine called. Danielle, the Everridge investors just withdrew. They said they won't work with Callahan & Co. unless you're involved. I didn't feel joy, just a deep, settled quiet. That evening, Mom called. You need to come home. No, I said. You gave the legacy to Claire. Let her carry it. The email came the next morning. Subject: Please meet me. Sender: Claire Callahan. I stared at it for a full 5 minutes. No grand apology, no excuses. Just, I can't justify what happened. But I want to talk. Not about the company, about us. I need to understand. I didn't answer right away. That night, while cleaning out my desk drawer, I found a folded piece of paper, my old business growth proposal from 2020. Still crumpled from when Dad tossed it aside in a meeting. I smoothed it out on the table, stared at the notes in red ink, the projections that had all come true. The ones no one had believed until I made them happen. The next morning, I typed, Tomorrow, 8 a.m., Hearth and Bloom Cafe. She was already there when I walked in. Window seat. Perfectly styled, of course. A cappuccino in front of her, still full. She stood when she saw me. I didn't hug her. Thanks for coming, she said softly. I sat, said nothing. Claire fidgeted with the edge of her napkin. I know what I did was wrong. I followed Dad's lead. I didn't question it. I should have. I was scared. You weren't scared, I cut in. You were eager. You saw a shortcut and took it. She looked down and for once didn't argue. After a long silence, she finally spoke again. Dad, he's talking about bringing you back, officially. He knows the company needs you. I laughed, short and bitter. Needs me now that it's falling apart? Claire nodded. He's even open to offering shares, maybe 15%, and a deputy executive role. I leaned back in my chair. You want me to come back and fix the mess, but as your second in command? Her silence was all the answer I needed. I pulled out my notebook. I'd already written my terms. 40% equity, I said calmly. A board seat, executive director title, equal to or higher than yours. Full control over Ever Ridge, if it's still salvageable. She blinked. 40? Yes, 40, I replied. For 10 years of unpaid overtime, lost relationships, and carrying this company while you were off taking selfies in Santorini. She didn't argue. Instead, she took a breath and said, I'll tell Dad. 2 hours later, he called. Blocked number. Danielle, he said, we need to talk. Without lawyers and a contract, there's nothing left to talk about. You're pushing this too far. No, Dad, I said, my voice even. I'm just no longer letting you push me around. Silence. Then a sigh. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., at Harold's law office. I was already in my car, heading home. I had a folder on the passenger seat with everything they'd need to see. Documented proof of my contribution, signed letters from clients, performance metrics from the last 7 fiscal years. I didn't prepare that for negotiation. I prepared it for war. The next morning, I walked into the glass-paneled office like I belonged there. Because I did. Dad sat across. Harold, our longtime legal counsel. Claire wasn't there. Better. Harold adjusted his glasses. We've reviewed your terms. I nodded. You'll need to sign today, or I'm meeting with Dawson Group at 2 p.m. Dad stared at me. You're serious? I always was, I said. You just never listened. He glanced at the paperwork in front of him, then at Harold. After a pause that felt like years, he reached out his hand. Start over? I looked at his hand, then back at him. This wasn't a family moment. This was business. I shook it. An hour later, it was done. 40% equity taken directly from his share. A voting seat on the board. Executive director title. Full control of Ever Ridge. Mom still held 20%. Claire, now 35%. But neither could overrule me. When I walked out of that office, the paper in my hand wasn't just a contract. It was a declaration. I wasn't a placeholder anymore. I was the one holding the map. And this time, we were following my direction. 2 weeks later, I returned to the office. Not as an employee, but as co-owner, executive director, and the new face of the company they once tried to erase. The first thing I did was change my office. I picked the one with natural light, clean walls, and space to breathe. No mahogany desks or heavy furniture that felt like a shrine to someone else's legacy. Just a long wooden table, a soft rug, a bookshelf filled with real materials and real people's stories. I even added a beanbag in the corner so I could read contracts without straining my neck. That was something no Morgan had ever allowed. Above the desk, I framed the first Ever Ridge sketch I ever made. There was still a faint coffee stain in the corner from the day Dad laughed at it and pushed it aside. I framed that too. The first team meeting was short and quiet. Some people clapped. Some watched, waiting to see if I would stay. I didn't raise my voice or promise change. I just said, "We're not fixing the company. We're reimagining it." The first order of business: reset the culture. No more unpaid late nights. No more Sunday emails. I put in a 45-hour weekly cap. Anything above that required prior approval and a clear business reason. I sat down with every department head, talked, listened, took notes. Not because I didn't know what I was doing, but because they needed to see that I valued their time and ideas. And I meant it. I wasn't just here to clean up someone else's mistakes. I was building something from the ground up. Claire struggled. At first, she didn't understand why she had to attend daily check-ins, why she no longer had access to operations or finance. I had to remind her, softly but firmly, that creative director meant just that: brand, marketing, and customer experience. She no longer got to tweak timelines or override project budgets based on vibes. Still, I didn't exile her. Every week, we had coffee and context, my term for one-on-one meetings where I coached her through what she didn't know: how to read construction metrics, how to evaluate subcontractor bids, how to spot hidden fees in supplier contracts. Once she snapped, "Why does everything have to be so complicated?" I smiled. "Because complication is what kept this company alive when it almost died." She blinked. Then she wrote it down. Ever Ridge. Took time to recover. But not long. 3 weeks in, I got an email from Eleanor Wynn, the principal investor. "We're open to renegotiating, under one condition. The project must be led solely by Danielle Morgan." I printed it, pinned it on the team bulletin board. No speech. Just let them read it. After a few seconds of silence, someone clapped, then another, and then the whole office. Not for me, for us, for the fact that we were finally back on the map. Dad still came in, but only 3 days a week. No input on operations, no surprise walkthroughs. Mostly, he sat in his old office, now smaller and tucked behind the admin wing. He read reports, occasionally gave feedback. Once, during a budget meeting, he asked me what Q3 retention anomaly meant. He looked older that day. Not just in years, but in relevance. I didn't humiliate him. I just explained the term and kept going. He was still my father. But he was no longer my boss. 3 months later, Morgan and Callahan re-signed the Ever Ridge contract with an expanded scope and an added $2 million in projected value. 4 former clients returned. 2 new investors reached out. We weren't just back, we were leading again. Claire and I, well, we weren't close, but we had boundaries now. Respect. She no longer interrupted me in meetings, and I no longer avoided her gaze. One day, she knocked on my door, hesitated, and asked, "Do you ever think we'll be okay?" I didn't answer right away. Then I said, "I think we'll be different, and maybe that's better." She nodded, and that was enough. That afternoon, I opened a letter that had arrived by courier. Inside was a handwritten note from Eleanor. "You were the reason we